Now, music industry fraud is evolving. It follows the path of least resistance, and the music industry needs to learn from other sectors to protect trust, payouts, and the livelihoods of everyone involved in that value chain. That's the premise of this webinar today. And while everyone continues to join us and enters the webinar room, I'll quickly go over the kind of things that you're going to lead the session with. And that is, you'll learn about the most common types of fraud affecting the music ecosystem and a roadmap for the next steps in fraud detection, identity verification, and payment protection. Some cross-industry insights that you can apply immediately in your organization from other industries that have successfully done it. A clearer understanding of the various fraud vectors that are impacting the music industry and how the Music Fights Fraud Alliance is building some shared practices there, and some practical next steps to build resilience, improve trust, and generally have a better time. Let's introduce, first of all, our expert panelists. I'm just going to go around the room as I see them. We have Patra Sinha, who's the General Counsel at Symphonic and is also on the board of the Music Fights Fraud Alliance. Hello, Patra. We also have Brian Johnson, who's Head of Artist and Industry Partnerships International at Spotify. Hi, Brian. Good to see you again.
Yep.
And finally, last but not least, we have Connor Cox, VP of Revenue at the global payouts platform Trolley. Hi, Connor.
Yo.
Good to have you here. And I'm Musicali's managing editor, Joe Sparrow. Now, we're going to have some time for questions at the end of this session. So please, as a question pops into your head, hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and submit your questions, and we'll answer as many as we can, either in a live appropriate moment or right at the end. Okay, let's move straight into it and let's take a bit of a snapshot on the current fraud landscape in the music industry. I'm going to go around the room and grab a bit of sort of context from all your different positions. So in your role, how do you define fraud in the music industry? And from your perspective, what impact does it have on royalty accuracy, artist livelihoods, the people that are impacted at your part of the music industry? Patra, you're first on my list, so let's start with you.
All right. I would say from a legal and operational standpoint, we're looking at fraud as anything that is, distorting, misdirecting, misallocating credits and royalties. I mean, really, at the end of the day, that's what it is primarily about is money, deriving value from royalties. And so anything along the chain that would misdirect those royalties to the wrong parties would be something that we want to look at as fraud. I mean, the result is all the same, like whether it's, a small scheme or something much more complicated, it's all aimed at, we believe, directing the royalties to the wrong place.
Great, thank you. Very succinct. Let's zoom then to the DSP level. Brian, how do you see it from where you are?
Well, a lot of my work is focused on working with artists and their teams on global partnerships, particularly through our Spotify for Artists brand, as well as music policy initiatives. So I'm thinking about this and coming at this from a quite particular lens. It's the artificial streaming lens. And the way Spotify defines artificial streaming, we say that an artificial stream is a stream that doesn't reflect genuine user listening intent. So if we actually unpack that to try and figure out what that means, it's looking at unusual activity, something that doesn't represent real, genuine listening behavior. So you think about a bot or a script or some sort of automated process that's really designed to try and manipulate streaming services like Spotify. Now, this is a huge issue because it undermines the fair playing field that streaming represents. And, if we don't do anything about this, if this is left unchecked, artificial streams can dilute the royalty pool and they can shift money, divert money away from artists who are genuinely trying to earn a living. They're releasing music, but trying to build an authentic audience. And it can divert that money to bad actors trying to take advantage of the system.
Great, thanks, Brian. Connor, you're a little bit further down the flow of money chain. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think we see fraud really as like sort of that last mile piece. So the good work's been done up top to get the streaming fraud out and make sure that it's real people getting real plays to generate their revenue. And we see fraud as sort of that, getting the money to those right people. So attribution is done well. We're doing everything great up top, but we see fraud in the form of like account takeovers and chargebacks to marketplaces and really just getting into the flow of that money and diverting it to bad actors. We see, coordinated schemes that are quite large in nature and require many different actors. And then we see the small cases of an individual taking over someone's account right before payday. So that's how we think about it. We think about, anyone doing anything to move money into pockets of people that didn't do the work is how we think about fraud, and really trying to put, things in place and help companies put process and tooling in place to make that really hard to do and catch it before the money actually moves into a bank account that it doesn't belong in.
What I want to just to get the sort of maybe a more of a tangible snapshot on it. I'm interested in what the really common forms are of fraud. We've heard, account takeovers and things like that. But there's streaming manipulation, there's identity fraud, there's payment scams, there's huge networks of systems to make this happen. So I'm just, perhaps I'll go around the room again and just sort of perhaps grab from each of you the form of streaming fraud that you find yourself engaging with the most, just to give us a flavor of all the different forms. Patra, I'll let you pick which hat you choose, whether it's Symphonic or the Music Fights Fraud Alliance here, to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think those roles are like very parallel and seeing some of the same information. And I think the great thing about the Alliance is that now we can kind of share that information and see really where the parallels are, because I think fraud is a business. I mean, it's just like all of us are operating and functioning in our daily business, and we're surveying the market and we're learning about the market that we're in, and we are adapting to make our business more successful, but we're doing it in a legitimate and um, we're doing it from that business perspective of wanting to grow. And when you think about that from the fraud perspective, like that's what they're doing as well. They're trying to learn about our business, learn how royalties flow, learn where the gaps and loops are to exploit that. And so the more we change and adapt our business models, then they learn that and they adapt and change their business models as well. And so it's just trying to find really universally the ways that we can close as many loops and gaps as possible along the way. I mean, I think we've all given some really good examples of the types of fraud we're seeing, but it's kind of limitless. I mean, you will continue, if that's your business, if fraud is your business model, you will continue to try to exploit any loop that you can find. And that's why these conversations are so important, because it's what helps us to close those gaps and loops along the way and say, okay, oh, wait, I've identified this other little entry point over here. We're going to close that up and we're going to make a statement about that that makes its way out into the fraud community so that they understand we're working just as fast as they are to close the gaps.
Yeah. Thank you. Brian, famously, Spotify has tons and tons of data on everything that happens on the platform. So when you're tasked with looking at that in terms of fraud, what's the thing you find that as a company you look at the most? Where is the fraud in that, all that?
Well, I think one thing we've been focused on recently, certainly with the artist community, is trying to help people, trying to stop it before it happens. I think that's the big thing, right? Trying to actually prevent artificial streaming from happening in the first place. And a real challenge this year and the past few years is an artist going on a social platform, again, to build their career, to spread the news or updates on what they're up to. They get targeted with an ad, and it's an ad promising streams, adds to playlists, maybe followers, and it's, I don't know, $50, $100, maybe a bit more. And the artist thinks, all right, well, I don't know any better. It's a considerable amount out of what I was going to pay, but if that's going to get me a head start, then I'll give it a go. And we've just seen too many people caught in this trap and too many of these bad actors springing up. So, there are multiple areas we're focused on, but trying to stop this before it's happening, and also trying to give artists the opportunity to tell us when it is happening and if they think they've been added to a suspicious playlist. And you mentioned, tangible actions. A big thing for us is listening to the artist community. We read our socials, we read the emails coming in. We're out having meetings daily with the artist community. And a big piece of feedback was, look, I think I've been added to some sort of suspicious playlist. How can I tell you directly? So we actually launched a form on Spotify for Artists where artists can come on and tell us if they've been added to a playlist that they think is driving suspicious, maybe botted streams of their music, we'll take that away and investigate it further. So, it's definitely one way in which we're seeing artists targeted directly. But, this is where Music Fights Fraud Alliance really comes into being, because everyone's sat in one room around, or dialing in from different rooms, but we're sat around a table or virtual table having these discussions. And possibly for the first time, maybe ever, maybe in a while, we're able to share this key information and try and stamp this out.
Yeah. Connor, you're sort of at the very end of the pipeline, if you like.
Yeah.
You in some ways, if the fraud happens up here, it's sort of by the time it reaches you, it's a little bit more complex in terms of roles and responsibilities there. But what are you seeing at that payout end?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, like our goal is to try and like remove the incentive. So if you can't get paid for all of the work that you're doing and all of the artificial streaming and all that cost you incur, it starts to not make sense to continue investing and growing that side of your business, to use Petra's sort of analogy there. So I think that's how we think about it, is like how can we remove the incentive as the entity that needs to move the money from, a Spotify to one of their artists or whomever one of our customers are. And that's what we think about. So for us, like the type of fraud we see is typically people trying to jump in line and get paid for something they didn't do. It's trying to take over a whole bunch of accounts so that it's hard for, a DSP to go and block everyone. So we'll siphon money out of the system that way. And I think for us, like there's certainly places in the world where that's more likely. So we're starting to try and build some patterns up internally to say, hey, if we see an increase in activity from a certain place, or if we see something in your recipient information, like to flag that. And then we're always thinking about friction. Like it's a classic power law rule. Like not all of the users in a system are bad. There's typically a small number of bad actors that do the majority of the damage. So starting to introduce some things in other industries like phone number verification. So when you're going to get paid and if you want to get paid off schedule, we want another piece of information from you and we want to do another device confirm with a two-factor or something like that. So that's where we tend to see it. It's at the very last mile. That last mile is where the incentive actually gets withdrawn from. So even though we're super late in the cycle, we feel like we're still in a really good spot to support businesses, because that last mile is what gets the incentive for all of the hard work upstream to, create fraudulent content, distribute it, misrepresent who you are, stream it through a bot farm. Like all of that work happens upstream from us. But if we can get good at understanding who those people are through, a series of attributes, through tying in with Music Fights Fraud and, contributing to that database, but also being able to reference it on sign up for folks, that's one of the ways that we can help, remove the incentive and make it more challenging to get paid for doing bad work. So that's kind of how we think about our position in that value chain right now.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. It sounds like a perpetual game of whack-a-mole, and rather you than me. The picture we're getting here of fraud in the music industry is that you're up against enormous organized crime that could be state-sponsored. There's hugely sophisticated machines that people are building and systems to combat the existing system, and there are weak spots that you've all mentioned throughout the music industry, and people are targeting them. So perhaps we can move on to sort of looking ahead, if you like, or taking stock of the world around us, and like what can the music industry learn from other industries? What are the proven approaches that work, and how can they be applied to the music business? Sectors like banking and fintech and e-commerce have been battling fraud forever. Like that is essentially a part of their job. But perhaps thinking about the sort of areas that you work in and where you're seeing weak points, what lessons are all of you recommending that the people that you connect with use that can be perhaps parallel from these other places? Patra, I'll start with you again, because it seems to be working quite well to go around like this.
Yeah, thank you. I think if we look back on the responses you just got and sort of tie that together, we're a global business. This is a global industry, just like the other industries that you mentioned, and it sounds like the exploitation by fraudsters kind of relates back to automation, scale, and jurisdictional gaps. I mean, that kind of summarizes some of the examples that you got here. And so thinking about this from the legal perspective, it's always my recommendation to be proactive, get ahead of things. Controlling your own narrative is really very important. And so as the owners of this industry, we're better positioned. We understand our business models. We are in a better place to identify what those gaps and loops are and to work together through like Music Fights Fraud Alliance so that we are less fragmented to identify where those gaps are and like how to plug and fill them. And so I am, coming from the legal background, very much in favor of policy, but, we can end up like other industries where you have governmental regulations placed, or you can get ahead of that and shape and frame your own policies and your own governance frameworks. And I feel like those other industries, they also have some of that government regulation, but they've also gotten ahead of it with very, complex risk rubrics with their compliance infrastructures, and they're collaborating on those things. And that's a great reason why we're working with NCFTA through the Music Fights Fraud Alliance, because they've stepped ahead of us. They've already had these conversations, and they've developed their frameworks to sort of systematize this and know. And so I think some of the things that we could look at back up the chain from what Connor is talking about, from payments, going back to know your customer, know your rights holder, know your business. I mean, if you are requiring that information further up the chain and placing better controls around that collectively as an industry, not just one distributor here, one DSP over here. Like if everyone is applying sort of those same frameworks and creating our own governance framework, then I think that's a better approach to catch a lot more of it on the front end.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Petra. Brian, um, you mentioned earlier education and helping artists sort of become aware of things. What is Spotify specifically doing to combat fraud? And where do you pull those learnings from to implement?
So I guess there's three key areas. There's prevention, detection, mitigation. But if we look at prevention and again, how we actually stop it happening in the first place, education is key. For us, it's how we tell people what artificial streaming is, what it looks like, and the data and visually if they're served adverts, how they can avoid it. So we're constantly building out and rolling out initiatives and resources, such as the Artificial Streaming Masterclass video we launched a few months back, which includes Andrea, who's the chair of Music Fights Fraud Alliance, Andrea Gleason, and David Martin, CEO of TuneCore. They're both on the video. There's a dedicated section on Spotify for Artists where we're able to tell this narrative, this kind of step-by-step guide in text as well. I mentioned the playlist reporter form earlier. That's a tangible action that we took based on feedback from the artist community. Policies are really important. Setting our stall out, again, based on feedback, again, informed by what we're seeing, on our own platform and in the broader market. And there's a few policies we introduced over the past 18 months, 2 years, including artificial streams don't earn royalties. They're fully removed from royalty calculations. They do not dilute the royalty pool. We make sure that those streams don't count towards public stream numbers, so things like monthly listener counts or charts. We make sure artificial streams don't positively influence recommendation algorithms. And of course, we report all artificial streams to the label or distributor. It's very important that we're in contact with our partners to let them know exactly what's happening with the music that they've delivered to us. And of course, in severe cases, music may be removed from Spotify playlists. Labels and distributors may get charges. So there's different policies that we have in place. There's different ways we can educate people. But the thing for us, it's not always the stick, right? It's not always just trying to tell people off for doing it. It's like the real interesting bit is how do we stop people doing it in the first place? How do we come together as an industry and educate and inform people? And just going back to your initial question, you asked about what we can learn from other kind of industries. I find it encouraging just as a user of my bank, whenever I go on and try and transfer money or do like some sort of exchange, I get asked a million questions now about, is it for friends and family? Is it for goods and services? Is it for, so do you trust the person you're sending it to? And I'm quite comforted by that. And I think if I put myself in the shoes of an artist who's responding to an advert on a legit platform, maybe a social platform, I'd want trust that that advert is genuine and there's a genuine company behind it, not trying to deceive me. So I think there's like checks and balances that we can put in place right across the board.
Thanks, Brian. And a few people are asking questions. Don't forget to add yours to the Q&A button. And Brian, you'll be pleased to know people are asking about AI and what Spotify is doing. So we will come to that later in the discussion as well. Connor, you're working with payouts, and you're working in a very broad global sense.
Yep.
But with regards to the music industry, what are the best practices and frameworks that work really well at combating fraud in the music industry?
Ooh, loaded question. Good one. I mean, if I zoom out, like when we like classify like just generally like a good company and maybe a poor company when it comes to fraud, like poor companies tend to look at a single attribute to form their opinion of a bad actor instead of looking at, a good account's going to look at multiple attributes. Attributes can be things like the actions they take in your app, their behaviors month to month, the firmographic info you collect from someone when they sign up. So having a more like 360-degree view of someone, not just like who they are, but also what they do, how they act. So I think that's something that separates people. And then poor companies also sort of block and forget, which is this idea of not having memory. Yeah, we were talking about that before, but like good companies have like an immune system. They have B and T cells. They remember you. They track you. If you show up again, they're able to identify you and block you and make sure that you're not withdrawing value from their system. Poor companies ban you and then they forget about you. And then if they're tracking you on fewer attributes, it's way easier for you being the bad actor, to show back up in a different way, and to just continue to do what you're going to do. And again, I block you once I forget about you. So we see that routinely from companies that haven't invested some of the time and effort to build a system to manage recipients and understand who they are. So that's that continuous game of whack-a-mole versus hitting that mole and then that mole can't pop up again. It's got to go somewhere else. And that's when Music Fights Fraud starts to get, I think, really impactful as well. Because if company A, whacked the mole has to leave and go to company B. Well, if both of those companies are part of Music Fights Fraud, it gets, again, way harder for that individual to go in and extract value. And then if we're doing the things like Brian's talking about if something changes or before you get paid, we want to do an additional check, gather a little bit more info, maybe another attribute, the incentives start to go away. So that's what we see the good companies doing, is they've got a perspective on a user that's more than a single attribute wide, tracking multiple things. They don't ban and forget bad actors. They ban them and they remember them. And then ideally, like we work with a bunch of gaming companies, and I would say businesses that were born online. Music was born far before the internet existed. But as a gaming company, a lot of these companies were born in the internet era, and they've been building their own equivalent of Music Fights Fraud over the last 10 years as they've banned bad actors and they've banned people, and they've gone and bought businesses and they've done the same thing. So that's what I would say differentiates folks, is that they know that this is a business investment fraudsters are making. If you ban me once, I'll certainly show back up again. So what can you do as a business to learn more about that? We often talk about honeypotting a bit with a lot of our companies. Like, don't ban the person just on sign up, collect more information from them, ask them for more details, help you fill out a fuller picture of who they are, so that when you cancel them or remove them from your service, it's a lot harder for them to come back. And it's also a lot more challenging for them to take their services to somewhere else and try to do the same thing. Seen that with a lot of like the DIY distributors, is there's like a clear benefit to tying into something like Music Fights Fraud and building a more comprehensive profile of who that bad actor is before you get rid of them.
Patra, let's put your Music Fights Fraud Alliance hat on for a second. We all work in some different ways with the music industry, and the music industry can be a bit of a closed book in terms of sharing information between itself and other areas of the industry, to put it mildly. What are you doing at the Music Fights Fraud Alliance to build those kind of shared approaches and encourage people to actually share?
I think along the lines of identifying exactly where we can find these alignments through the conversations that we're having, and coming up with a systemic approach to okay, this is what works. This is what's working for our competitors. This is what's, working within the collective voices that we're hearing here and building that framework out. And I want to step back for a second because I always talk a lot from the legal perspective, but I want to put my business hat on for a second and just think about how, the conversation surrounding fraud so much, we sometimes lose sight of the fact that we also have good actors who really want to work with us or doing the right things. They're, artists and labels trying to make a living. And we are putting them through the same paces that we're putting fraud actors through. And so, to the extent that, it's almost like a punishment for them because it's not intended to catch them, but it's, more controls, more frameworks, more questions. And if everyone is not doing it, we can end up driving away our good customers to prevent from getting the bad ones. And it becomes a bit unfair to those who are taking the actions. And so sometimes I know that too much policy and framework can be a little scary, but I honestly think it's a business facilitator because then once you have that baseline set and everyone is applying similar controls and similar frameworks and looking at similar risks and attributions like Connor was talking about, then we're all on the even playing field. We can focus on our good customers because the fraud issues are sort of running in the background. And then we're like, okay, we've identified another loop. Let's close it. Here's how. This is what we're going to do. And we can move on from that. And I think it to some extent will prevent what we're trying to, and what we're talking about is preventing this platform hopping of them going from one place to the other because it's all more uniform. But sometimes, we talk about best practices and things, and that can get us so far. But sometimes there has to be a policy and framework adoption to really get in there and close out the loops. But I do think that Music Fights Fraud Alliance has been wonderful to start breaking down some of those barriers and the fragmented conversations that we've been having to bring that collectively together with groups like NCFTA. We are talking with law enforcement. We're talking about what we need to do to build and paper a case on the enforcement task force. And so maybe we were a little behind these other industries, but with the help and these collective voices, we are catching up quickly.
And are you finding there's a sort of people are sharing, the industries, the companies are sharing the information that's needed with each other, or are they still sort of trying to suss each other out a little bit?
I think there may have been a little of that in the beginning because it was so new. And, there's also legal issues that you have to think about and really figure out what the boundaries and the edges are. And you need those legal voices involved in groups like NCFTA that has done this in other industries to make sure everyone gets comfortable with sharing that information, that information then doesn't go outside of that group in a way that it shouldn't, and having everyone understand what the legal boundaries are. But once you attack those issues and get everyone comfortable, I like to call us all friendly competitors in the music business because I do think we each have a mutual respect for each other. We think highly of the people within this group. We're all deciding, like new members into the Music Fights Fraud Alliance. It has grown so much since it started. And I think everyone there is coming in good faith to
Yeah.
have these conversations and make this a better framework for all of us.
Great, thank you. We've had lots of questions come in, so I'm eager to move on to some sort of takeaways and actionable stuff, and then we'll drill into some of the questions as well. So I'd like to sort of get from each of you some sort of immediate, actionable steps for people who are watching. And what can they do tomorrow morning to get on top of something, even if it's a small thing, just to move things forward to protect themselves a bit more? Brian, let's start with you. Because obviously that's often the starting point for a lot of people, is getting the music distributed onto platforms like yours. You've mentioned a few things there about reporting from artists and education, but what else can people do who are connecting with your platform in certain ways to get ahead of the game here?
Well, I think first of all, use all the legit tools, features, best practices we've built for artists to genuinely, build their audience and get the music out to as many people as possible. Don't be fooled into paying for playlist placement. I know it's tempting to some people, especially people starting out who don't know, but you shouldn't do that. But we have a playlist pitch form. It's free. People just need to log into Spotify for Artists to use that to pitch upcoming unreleased music to our editorial team for consideration. Do your research. If you're going to work with, if you're thinking about using a marketing promotional company, which isn't uncommon in music, if you think about for decades, people have hired maybe a radio plugger or TV plugger or press person, online help. People do that to build out strategies and again to find an audience. But if you're thinking about doing it for streaming in particular, or certainly from my point of view, Spotify in particular, do your research to make sure that the service is legit and they're essentially not going to plug your music to a load of botted playlists. Ask them questions in advance, look for reviews, just make sure that they're authentic. And remember to report any suspicious playlists. Again, we've got this feature, which is a way for people to let us know directly. We have a way for the industry at scale to let us know. And I saw a question come up in the chat about that, so I'm happy to share an email address shortly. But this form can allow artists to let us know directly. It goes to our team. It doesn't just go into a void. It goes to our team who look into it every single day. These are people whose full-time job it is to look at this. So yeah, there are a few things just to keep in mind.
Okay, thanks. Connor, let's sort of zoom all the way to the other end of the payment pipeline then. You've mentioned identity fraud and payment manipulation and all these really complex strategies people are using. How can the same sort of question really, but from your perspective, how can companies safeguard against that kind of thing?
I mean, for us, I think part of it is just zooming out on your business and like asking yourself, like, do we have a KYA process? Like, do we have a process by which we, get certain that the people that we're working with are who they say that they are? And then if you don't, start thinking about, how you may add that in. I think for us, like we work with a lot of businesses that, weren't maybe doing taxes before and they start doing taxes, and that adds a little bit of friction because now you're asking someone to complete a tax form before they get paid. So I would really, look at, how do we know who we ask yourself that question and then map out the different points in that user journey where you could collect those pieces of information. And if you don't have a really good solid answer to that question, I would look at tools or systems or other ways of doing this that exist out in the world. Because that's where I think the community piece helps too. Like small businesses that need to get up and running aren't thinking about adding additional overhead in the early days. But when you start to get scale and fraud starts to be something that, may make sense in your ecosystem because you're to that size, you want to have processes and systems in place or at least be thinking about it. So I would map out, ask yourself that question. Do you have a KYA process? Do you have anything in your ways of working that looks or feels like that right now? I think there's great examples out there that you can go and check out if you don't, and then start mapping, how could we start to collect some of that info and build a more comprehensive profile of these people that we're paying? Because that's all the foundational stuff that you need to start checking, has something changed from sign up to now 6 months later when we want to pay? And if yes, maybe we ask for some additional pieces of info. So that would be the first place I'd start is map out your process, look at, do you have any of this, in there right now? And then if not, look at ways to start collecting it because it's much easier to stop this and combat it with data than without it. And every company, no matter where they are, can start to collect a little bit more info on the people that they're paying.
Let me just ping you a question from one of the many questions we've had here, which is from Tom, who says, you're calling it KYA, know your artist. Tom's calling it KYC, know your customer. From your perspective, how robust are the current KYC or KYI practices in the value chain in the music industry?
I think that companies with global scale are doing it relatively well. I mean, we've got customers that use our trust product in music, but also in, gaming and other adjacent industries that have that long tail of people from all around the world who want to use their services and get paid for them. So I would say that it's new to music, but the concept is quite well known and pretty robust. Like we're borrowing from banking, KYC, we're borrowing from gaming, we're borrowing from these internet-driven industries that have a high need to keep fraud out. We're looking at other industries that have had to combat this, have come together, have built frameworks, the rising tide has lifted all the boats up now where this is just part of the user experience when you sign into online banking. And I think that time is coming for music. Like the royalty business model is really durable. It's getting bigger. That just means it's going to have more eyes on it and more interest to go in and extract value out. So I think pretty quickly over the next couple of years, you'll see music transform quite a bit in this vein, especially as streaming continues to get bigger and AI becomes more and more a part of everyday life. I think this stuff's required to protect the songwriter and protect the people that make a creative industry go. So yeah, I think we're starting to see it now, but I would imagine over the next 2 years, most companies and sign-up experiences will have some element of
Yeah.
KYC, KYA rolled into them, and certainly on getting paid or moving money out of these systems. I think you'll see an extra step in that journey that just adds trust and, confidence that we're paying the right people here for doing great work.
Brian, I've got a bunch of people asking questions in the chat, in the Q&A, about what Spotify is doing to counter AI-driven fraud, and I think they're specifically talking about AI-generated music, and what Spotify's position is and what you're doing with that there.
Yeah, it's a great question, great questions. And I think, first of all, I'll say that the challenge with artificial streaming fraud overall is the more we say, and that's collectively everyone on this call and our company's Music Fights Fraud, the more you tell bad actors how to behave and the guardrails to work within. So sometimes it might seem like a company is quiet on this, but this journey isn't new to us. We've invested massively in fighting spam over the past decade. And in fact, in the past 12 months alone, which is actually a period marked by an explosion in generative AI tools, we've removed over 75 million spammy tracks from Spotify. Now, 75 million tracks, that's huge. We know that AI tech is developing fast, and it's important that we're developing and rolling out new policies frequently that enable us to counter any AI-driven fraud. So in the past couple of weeks, we've announced a new set of measures. We've introduced a new impersonation policy that clarifies how we're handling claims about AI voice clones and other forms of unauthorized vocal impersonation as well. We're rolling out a new spam filter to identify uploaders engaging in spam tactics. So,
and that's spam music, you mean in this sense?
Yeah. Essentially, there's tactics like people doing mass uploads, duplicates, people hacking SEO, artificially short track abuse. These are all things that have existed for a while, but they've certainly been accelerated with AI technology. And we are helping develop, and we'll be supporting a new industry standard for AI disclosures in music credits. And this is developed through DDEX. This standard, it's going to give artists, it's going to give rights holders a way to clearly indicate where and how AI played a role in the creation of a track. So whether something's AI generated, whether it's vocals, instrumentation, could be post-production. As this info is submitted through labels and distributors and other partners, we'll begin displaying it across the app. Now, by taking this approach and supporting an industry standard, we believe we can help drive wider adoption. Again, so it's not Spotify working in a silo. How do we actually bring an industry along and ensure listeners have trust in the music ecosystem and artists as well?
And another question that's sort of being raised that's sort of connected to that is, and this is understandable, that this is a type of fraud and type of system that moves really, really fast. And there are people who are worried that real artists are sort of getting sucked in to the fraud vortex, if you like. And how do you make sure that you're targeting just the right people and not sort of innocent parties? People are concerned about that,
Yeah, it's a valid concern. And, as with anything we roll out at Spotify, whether it's a product update, we're big fans of testing things first. So these new policies I just mentioned, we're rolling them out gradually because we want to make sure we get it right and we don't catch genuine artists in the net, so to speak. And with regards to, let's talk about artificial streaming, it's something we take really seriously. And if we've had to put ourselves in a position where music's being taken out of the playlist or there's a fine being introduced, it's got to a serious level. There's a serious amount of artificial streaming on that track. And that's a conversation we then have with the rights holder, and we take it from there. And if there's any questioning, we're there for the conversation. We want to make sure that we're good partners both ways, and we can stamp this up.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I've got one more question here, which it sort of builds on that. Maybe not AI fraud, but builds on fraud and identifying fraudulent tracks in general. And this is perhaps one for Patrick. This is from Annabella Coldrick. Hi, Annabella. This is sort of, I'm guessing, from the perspective of artists and people working with artists. And Annabella says, what happens when monies have been paid to the distributor and the CMOs or publishers before the track has been taken down? And so like, we talk of it as a pipeline, and there's a, fraud. One thing we've learned from this is that fraudsters time things really well and move really fast, and to avoid getting the window being shut before they can get money out. So what happens then when that money gets paid through and then it's later determined to be fraudulent? Is there a framework for that at the moment?
I think there's not one defined answer that I would give to that question. I think I want to go back to what Connor was saying earlier about mapping from a KYA perspective. I'm going to borrow your acronym, but I think what we tend to forget in the music industry is that it is a global industry. We're doing cross-border transactions. They can be very complicated and complex. So you want to treat it as such, not just, it's fun, it's music business. But when you're doing that mapping, you want to take legal and tax advice because there's issues related to that need to be taken into account when you're mapping and sequencing how you're going to handle these things down the chain, back up the chain. And so I think from that perspective, each individual company that is dealing with that needs to look at that particular transaction, take legal and tax advice to sort out the best way to handle that. And I mean, I don't want to give legal and tax advice on this particular conference. I think that's a great question. And I think it's something that every distributor, every DSP, everyone along this pipeline is having to deal with and address. But it just drives home the point, like, don't try to do this mapping and sequencing yourself without taking the legal and tax advice. Because it can get complicated and there's certain things that you can do that will not be so intrusive to your good customers who are not bad actors, who are not trying to do fraud on your system. You don't want to punish them, but there's less intrusive ways like through Trolley and other apps where you can map and sequence that out in a way that you're doing the right things when you encounter that. So I know that's a roundabout and very general answer to that question. But I think it's really important to take legal and tax advice on those issues.
Great, thank you. And I've got one final, very, very fast question because we're out of time. Connor, let's talk about safeguarding from right at the end of the chain where payment happens. What could you recommend people can get to grips with immediately in terms of getting that? You're under pressure to get the money out as fast as possible to people and make that quick. So there's friction there. So what can people do to help that from their side?
I mean, one of the things, and I don't want to name too many names, but we certainly see certain types of payout methods are much easier and much more active with fraud. So I think for us, like we encourage bank transfer as an example where it's possible. Just to overgeneralize, it's a little bit more secure way to receive money, to collect info from someone, and it's a bit safer bet, we'll say, than maybe an e-wallet or something like that that only requires an email to spin up. So we think about that would be the main piece. And then I think like one of the big things and trends that we see is this just sort of discrepancy reporting is big for us. So when data changes in a system, making sure that you're flagged and you've been notified about that, that can be challenging when you work with a bunch of different vendors. But that's one of the bigger swings that we see with companies that are good and are trying to go towards great, is that they have systems for tax, like Petra's laid out. They have a system on the compliance side of things, and then they have a system for payouts. And the more coordinated those systems are, the more that they're talking to one another or using the same recipient profile, the easier it is for you as a business to call out when a bad actor could be entering your system and get rid of it quickly. So I would say coordination amongst those, and then looking at the payment methods as well that ultimately you're moving your money with that are more secure, harder to get. It's a lot harder to go and stand up a checking account at a bank in the US than it is to go, get a PayPal wallet as an example. So more secure methods tend to see less fraud. And that's something that, we've seen in aggregate across a bunch of different industries, but certainly half of the the money we move each year is out to rights holders, and that's been a trend that, just really easy out of the gate. You've got choices you can offer, and there are more secure choices and less secure choices. And as a business, I think if you're worried about it, choose the more secure basket of those.
Okay, great. Now, I mean, I could keep asking questions for a lot longer, but we have to wrap things up. So I encourage everyone watching to check out the event page again on musically.com, where you'll find more information about Brian, Petra, and Connor, and you can engage them in all the ways they've suggested. And of course, we will keep reporting on exactly this topic, as we do a lot on musically.com, because it's the kind of news that people keep wanting to read about and do something about. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you in particular to Brian, Connor, and Patra. And thanks for sharing all your wisdom. And I think the one takeaway we've got here is that the more everyone works together and shares information and helps each other, the better we'll all do. And that's a nice wholesome end to this webinar, isn't it? So thank you all very much. Thank you all for watching. And thanks for joining us here. I've been Joe Sparrow, and hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.